as a tool of war. The food insecurity in Gaza has reached catastrophic levels, with the entire population of approximately 2.1 million people facing crisis or worse levels of acute food insecurity, IPC Phase 3. A staggering 470,000 individuals are projected to face catastrophic levels of hunger, IPC Phase 5, indicating an extreme lack of food and other basic necessities. The likelihood of famine occurring between April and September is increasing, as key indicators of food insecurity, acute malnutrition, and mortality are expected to surpass famine thresholds under the prevailing conditions. The impact on children and other vulnerable populations is particularly devastating. Hunger and malnutrition have intensified sharply across Gaza since all aid was blocked from entering on March 2. An alarming 71,000 children and over 17,000 mothers are projected to require urgent treatment for acute malnutrition, a significant increase from the estimated 60,000 children estimated at the beginning of 2025. Reports indicate deaths by starvation, with at least 10 children dying daily, directly attributed to Israel's impeding access to vital supplies. Beyond children, older persons, comprising about 5% of Gaza's population, approximately 321,000 people in Palestine, and those with disabilities, face heightened vulnerability, with 78% of the elderly suffering from chronic illnesses and lacking essential supplies like adult diapers. Systematic aid blockades and impediments have exacerbated this crisis. For over 11 weeks, between March 2 and May 18, no humanitarian aid entered the Gaza Strip due to the siege imposed by Israeli authorities. This prolonged closure has led to basic humanitarian supplies, including food, fuel, medical aid, and vaccines, running out with devastating impact on the population. Border crossings into Gaza have been closed for over 2 months, the longest period the population has ever faced, causing food prices in markets to spike to astronomical levels, rendering what little food is available out of reach for most families. Despite over 116,000 metric tons of food assistance prepositioned in aid corridors, enough to feed 1 million people for up to 4 months, only very limited amounts have been permitted entry. Delivery of this limited aid is consistently impeded by access restrictions, delays in movement approvals, and insecure convoy routes. The UN and major aid groups have explicitly rejected the new US-Israel-backed distribution system, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF), calling it a militarized distribution system that does not adhere to humanitarian principles and cannot replicate the scale or accessibility of existing channels. The widespread hunger and impending famine in Gaza are not accidental consequences of conflict, but rather the result of a calculated and deliberate policy to inflict conditions of life designed to cause physical destruction. The prolonged and systematic aid blockade, coupled with the explicit statements from humanitarian agencies that aid is being weaponized through its denial, as part of a military strategy, demonstrates a clear intent. Testimonies from Gaza residents confirm this, describing starvation as another method of warfare the Israeli military uses against civilians. The rejection of the UN's proven effective aid delivery systems in favor of a militarized one, which has itself been associated with deadly incidents, further underscores a deliberate strategy to control and restrict aid rather than facilitate it. This confluence of evidencia, sustained aid denial, expert analysis of weaponization, and direct testimonies of starvation as a method of warfare strongly indicates that the widespread hunger and impending famine in Gaza are the result of a calculated and deliberate policy to inflict conditions of life designed to cause physical destruction, aligning with a key element of the crime of genocide. Table: Escalating food insecurity and malnutrition in Gaza. Indicator current status as of May/June 2025, notes and implications. Total population of Gaza approximate 1 million people. Nearly entire population is affected by food insecurity. People facing IPC Phase 3 crisis, or worse 100% of population, approximate 2.1 million, universal acute food insecurity, indicating widespread inability to meet basic food needs. People facing IPC Phase 5, catastrophic hunger, 470,000 people. Highest level of food insecurity, signifying extreme food deprivation, starvation, and destitution. Children needing urgent treatment for acute malnutrition 71,000 children, a sharp increase from 60,000 at the beginning of 2025, showing rapid deterioration in child health. Mothers needing urgent treatment for acute malnutrition over 17,000 mothers impacts maternal health and ability to care for children, perpetuating the cycle of malnutrition. Reported daily deaths of children from starvation 10 children daily direct evidence of mortality due to imposed conditions of life, a component of genocidal acts. Food aid prepositioned, WFP, 116,000 metric tons, enough to feed 1 million people for 4 months. Vast amounts of aid are available but blocked from entry. Food aid permitted/delivered, WFP, approximate. 700 trucks, enough for less than 300,000 people for 1 month, represents a small fraction of what is needed, highlighting severe and systematic aid obstruction. B. Decimation of life-sustaining infrastructure. Gaza's essential infrastructure has been systematically targeted, leading to a complete breakdown of services vital for survival. The medical rehabilitation system is at a breaking point, overwhelmed by traumatic injuries, damaged infrastructure, and severe shortages of specialists, supplies, and equipment. Only 48 of the 149 ambulances operational before March 18 are now functional, severely limiting emergency medical transport and forcing injured civilians to rely on makeshift means like donkey carts. 6 hospitals and 2 field hospitals are located in areas under displacement orders by Israeli authorities, further hampering the access of new patients to life-saving care. The UN Special Rapporteur's report details that 77% of healthcare facilities and 68% of telecommunication infrastructure have been destroyed or severely damaged. The director of Al-Shifa Hospital has warned of a real disaster for 300 kidney failure patients if electricity and fuel are not provided to power crucial generators, as the artificial kidney department is out of service due to attacks. The water and sanitation crisis is equally dire. Over 75% of households in Gaza report a decline in water access over the past month, amid rapidly deteriorating sanitation conditions. Widespread sewage overflow, a decreasing number of functional latrines, and reduced access to soap are creating conditions ripe for a major public health disaster. The UN Special Rapporteur notes that water supply has been severely affected, leading to the forced use of contaminated water, directly contributing to the spread of disease. Beyond critical health and water infrastructure, the scale of destruction is pervasive. Over 60% of homes, all universities, 60% of other educational facilities, and at least 195 heritage sites, 208 mosques, and 3 churches have been destroyed or severely damaged. This extensive and systematic destruction of the very fabric of civilian life aligns with stated intentions to make Gaza permanently impossible to live in. The destruction extends far beyond military targets, encompassing critical civilian infrastructure like hospitals, schools, homes, water and sanitation systems, as well as cultural sites. This is not incidental damage but widespread devastation of the societal foundation. This physical destruction is coupled with the deliberate denial of essential services such as electricity, fuel, and medical supplies, and the prevention of new patients from accessing even the remaining functional facilities. This creates a situation where even if infrastructure remains, it cannot function. The UN Special Rapporteur explicitly links this destruction to the deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction element of genocide, and notes stated intentions by Israeli officials to make Gaza permanently impossible to live in, where no human being can exist. The widespread and systematic destruction of the very fabric of civilian life homes, hospitals, schools, water, and sanitation combined with the blocking of essential resources necessary for their operation, indicates a deliberate strategy to make survival impossible or unbearable for the population. This goes beyond conventional military necessity. It aims to dismantle the foundational elements of a society, forcing displacement and effectively erasing the possibility of a normal life. This systematic rendering of the territory uninhabitable serves as a powerful means of collective punishment and directly contributes to the conditions of life element of genocide, demonstrating an intent to destroy the group by making their continued existence in their homeland unsustainable. Forced displacement and the erasure of Palestinian life. The conflict has resulted in an unprecedented scale of forced displacement, with at least 1.9 million people euro, approximately 90% of Gaza's population euro, displaced during the war. Many have been displaced repeatedly, some 10 times or more, forced to flee in search of safety that is consistently denied. Over 1.7 million Palestinians were displaced into overcrowded shelters and cramped quarters in southern Gaza. Despite the issuance of displacement orders by the Israeli military, designated safe zones and areas where displaced people gathered were systematically bombarded, effectively becoming areas of mass killing. Humanitarian corridors intended for safe passage were also targeted, transforming them into death corridors. This pattern of directing civilians to areas only to then attack them underscores a deliberate strategy of terror and denial of safe refuge. Thousands were killed while fleeing via routes and in areas declared safe by Israel. The human toll of displacement and destruction is captured in harrowing testimonies. Residents describe carrying severely injured or dead family members on their backs, witnessing bodies, including women, children, and men, lying on beaches with dogs feeding on them, and entire families being obliterated in direct bombings of their homes. Survivors recount enduring freezing conditions in makeshift tents lacking heat, electricity, and basic amenities, and facing constant terror from bombings and the presence of stray dogs. The psychological trauma is profound and indelible, marked by witnessing death, destruction, homelessness, profound loss, humiliation, and constant fear, with children particularly affected, many killed, maimed, or orphaned without surviving family. The overwhelming scale of displacement, affecting 90% of Gaza's population, often multiple times, pushes people into increasingly smaller and overcrowded areas. This scale suggests an intent beyond temporary evacuation. Crucially, the very areas designated as safe zones and humanitarian corridors are then systematically subjected to bombardment and violence, leading to further casualties and renewed displacement. This directly contradicts any claim of genuine concern for civilian safety. The UN Special Rapporteur explicitly states that this pattern, combined with calls for ethnic transfer and resettlement, leads to the conclusion that these were genocidal tools for ethnic cleansing. The consistent pattern of forced displacement, followed by the targeting of the very areas civilians are directed to, suggests a deliberate strategy to deny any secure refuge within Gaza. This is not merely an evacuation for safety but a coercive measure designed to systematically uproot the population from their homes and prevent their return, effectively making their continued existence in Gaza untenable. This aligns with the forcibly transferring children element of genocide. Even if internal, such displacement with intent to destroy can be evidence of genocidal intent, and serves as compelling evidence of the specific intent to destroy the group by making their continued presence in their homeland impossible, thereby achieving ethnic cleansing under the guise of safety. 3. The human slaughterhouses, targeting civilians at aid distribution points. A deadly aid, shootings at food distribution centers. The pursuit of basic sustenance in Gaza has become a perilous endeavor, with at least 245 Palestinians killed while desperately trying to secure food parcels from US and Israeli-led distribution centers. User query. This highlights the extreme danger associated with seeking basic necessities. On June 8, 2025 alone, at least 13 Palestinians were killed and over 150 injured when Israeli troops and American security contractors opened fire on crowds waiting for food near two aid distribution sites, one east of Rafah and another near the Wadi Gaza Bridge. Since the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF) program began on May 27, over 130 people have been killed and more than 700 wounded by Israeli troops while desperately trying to access meager food parcels. The violence has overwhelmed Gaza's hospitals, with Rafah's Red Cross Field Hospital reporting 12 mass casualty emergencies in just 2 weeks, with over 900 wounded arriving, 41 of whom were already dead upon arrival. Most of those treated were injured while trying to reach food distribution sites. Eyewitnesses recount gunfire erupting from the dangerous zone, where Israeli troops and their allies are stationed, approximately a kilometer from the aid site. Some observed masked men identified as a local militia, the Popular Forces led by Yasser Abu Shabab, allied with Israelis, attempting to organize crowds before opening fire directly into them when people pushed forward. One witness described it as an ambush. the Israelis from one side and Abu Shabaab from another. Survivors emphatically insist the shooting took place after sunrise, directly contradicting Israeli military claims of an active combat zone at night. Victims, many with gunshot wounds, were carried to clinics by makeshift means such as donkey carts, bicycles, or on foot, underscoring the collapse of emergency services. An Al Jazeera report explicitly describes these aid distribution centers as bait, being used to lure starving aid seekers in the sport of hunting. User query. This chilling characterization is echoed by Gaza's government media office, which condemned these sites as human slaughterhouses, accusing Israeli forces of deliberately luring desperate civilians to their deaths. This narrative portrays the aid process not as humanitarian relief, but as a calculated trap. The consistent and repeated mass casualties from gunfire at aid distribution centers, ostensibly for humanitarian relief, demonstrate a recurring pattern rather than isolated incidents. Testimonies point to Israeli forces and allied local groups firing directly into crowds, sometimes after attempts to organize them, and from dangerous zones, near Israeli positions. This suggests a coordinated presence in action. The Israeli military's explanations, such as firing warning shots or claiming an active combat zone at night, are directly contradicted by survivors and the timing of the shootings. This indicates a lack of transparency and potential misrepresentation of events. Al Jazeera and Gaza's government media office explicitly use terms like bait, sport of hunting, and human slaughterhouses, which are direct accusations of malicious intent. The repeated pattern of lethal force at aid points, the high and consistent casualty count, the presence and actions of Israeli forces and their proxies, and the explicit accusations of luring civilians suggest that these incidents are not accidental outcomes of crowd control or self-defense. Instead, they appear to be potentially deliberate traps where the desperate humanitarian need for food is exploited to draw large, vulnerable crowds into areas where they become targets. This systematic targeting of civilians seeking aid directly contributes to the killing members of the group and causing serious bodily or mental harm elements of genocide, turning the pursuit of basic survival into a death sentence and reinforcing the narrative of a deliberate campaign of destruction. B. The controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF). The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF) is a US-led initiative backed by Israel, presented as a new aid delivery mechanism. However, it has been unequivocally rejected by the UN and major aid groups, who refuse to participate in its operations. The UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has branded this US-backed system as humanitarian camouflage and explicitly called it an essential tactic of this genocide, directly blaming the moral and political corruption of the world for enabling the destruction of Gaza. The UN and its partners view it as a militarized distribution system that fundamentally does not adhere to humanitarian principles and cannot replicate the scale or accessibility of existing, proven aid channels. The GHF itself has acknowledged significant operational challenges and dangers. It has paused deliveries at its sites and closed the Rafah site due to the chaos of the crowds. The GHF repeatedly warns potential aid recipients that stepping off the military-designated road to reach the centers represents a great danger. This highlights the inherent dangers and lack of safety protocols in a system that bypasses established humanitarian mechanisms, placing desperate civilians at extreme risk. The GHF, rather than being an effective or principled humanitarian solution, appears to be a politically motivated mechanism. Its explicit rejection by established, experienced humanitarian organizations like the UN and major aid groups is highly significant. Despite its stated purpose, GHF distribution points are consistently associated with mass shootings and high civilian casualties. This direct contradiction between stated intent and actual outcome is critical. The UN Special Rapporteur's labeling of the GHF as humanitarian camouflage and a tactic of this genocide, along with OCHA's statement that aid denial appears designed to reinforce control over life-sustaining items as a pressure tactic as part of a military strategy, supports this interpretation. The GHF's own warnings about great danger and its closures due to chaos underscore its inherent unsafety and inability to manage aid distribution effectively or safely without military oversight. This suggests that the GHF serves less as a genuine aid delivery system and more as a means for Israel and the US to control aid flow, bypass international scrutiny, and potentially facilitate the luring of civilians into dangerous zones. This reinforces the argument that aid is being weaponized and that the US is complicit in actions that contribute to genocidal conditions by actively backing and promoting such a dangerous and ineffective system. For evidence of genocidal intent, a legal and factual indictment. A. The UN Special Rapporteur's findings, Anatomy of a Genocide. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, concludes in her report, Anatomy of a Genocide, that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating Israel's commission of genocide in the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023 has been met. The report meticulously details evidence for the three constitutive acts of genocide as defined by the 1948 Convention. Killing members of the group. Over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, representing approximately 1.4% of its population, through both direct lethal force and imposed life-threatening conditions. An additional 12,000 are presumed dead under rubble. Israel has employed over 25,000 tons of explosives, equivalent to 2 nuclear bombs, on buildings, using unguided munitions and 2,000-pound bunker-buster bombs on densely populated areas and safe zones. Thousands were killed by bombing, sniper fire, or summary executions, including those attempting to flee via routes and in areas declared safe. A staggering 70% of recorded deaths have consistently been women and children, with Israel failing to provide evidence that the remaining 30%, adult males, were active Hamas combatants, implying an intent to indiscriminately target the protected group by default. Deaths by starvation, including reports of 10 children daily, are directly attributed to Israel's impeding access to vital supplies. Causing serious bodily or mental harm. Palestinians have suffered relentless physical and psychological harm. Over 70,000 Palestinians have been injured, many with agonizing and life-altering injuries. Critical shortages of medical supplies have led to hazardous procedures like amputations without anesthesia, even for children, and prevented life-saving treatment for chronic conditions. Survivors endure indelible trauma from witnessing widespread death, destruction, homelessness, profound loss, humiliation, and constant fear. The report specifically highlights the torment inflicted on children, many of whom have been killed, maimed, or orphaned without surviving family, as a means to destroy the group in whole or in part, given children's significance to society's future. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. By mid-December, Israel's actions had destroyed or severely damaged most life-sustaining infrastructure in Gaza, including 77% of healthcare facilities, 68% of telecommunication infrastructure, over 60% of homes, all universities, and 60% of other educational facilities. Following a 16-year blockade, Israel imposed a complete siege on October 9, 2023, cutting off electricity, food, water, and fuel, with officials explicitly stating no aid would enter until hostages were freed. This deliberate denial of essential supplies was destined to cause deaths, more silent than those caused by bombs. Over 1.7 million Palestinians were forcibly displaced into overcrowded shelters and cramped quarters in southern Gaza, which were then systematically targeted. Israel's assault decimated Gaza's healthcare system, with hospitals overwhelmed and deliberately targeted, turning them into death zones. The ground invasion and aerial bombardment also destroyed agricultural land, farms, crops, animals, and fishing assets, undermining livelihoods and the environment. Israel has consistently impeded aid entry, allowing only woefully inadequate amounts, largely confined to the south, and attacks against UNRWA led to states suspending payments, further aggravating the humanitarian situation. By December 7, over 90% of Gaza residents suffered severe food insecurity, with people in northern Gaza resorting to animal feed and grass, and widespread use of contaminated water. These conditions put an estimated 50,000 pregnant women and 20,000 newborn babies at risk, increasing miscarriages by up to 300%. The relentless targeting of basic survival means has compromised Palestinians' ability to live on the land, aligning with stated intentions to make Gaza permanently impossible to live in, where no human being can exist. The report asserts that direct evidence of genocidal intent is uniquely present in the latest Gaza assault, distinguishing it from other conflicts. This intent is inferred from patterns of conduct and, crucially, from explicit statements by high-ranking Israeli officials. While Israel may claim its actions serve military objectives against Hamas, the scale, nature, and targets of its operations transcend conventional military necessity. The UN Special Rapporteur's report details widespread and indiscriminate destruction of civilian infrastructure, including 77% of healthcare facilities and over 60% of homes, high civilian casualties, 70% women and children, and the deliberate imposition of life-threatening conditions like starvation and lack of medical care. These actions are explicitly framed not just as collateral damage but as deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. This highlights a strategic choice to make survival impossible. OCHA further states that aid denial appears designed to reinforce control over life-sustaining items as a pressure tactic as part of a military strategy. This directly links humanitarian deprivation to military objectives. The obliteration of civilian infrastructure, the systematic starvation, and the targeting of safe zones go far beyond what is typically considered incidental to military operations. The deliberate creation of uninhabitable conditions and the systematic dismantling of the civilian support structure suggest that the military strategy itself incorporates elements that fulfill the actus reus of genocide. This implies that the military campaign is not solely focused on defeating a military group but is systematically dismantling the conditions for Palestinian life in Gaza, which, when combined with the explicit statements of intent from high-ranking officials, points to genocidal aims. The military strategy thus becomes a vehicle for genocidal acts. B. Incitement and dehumanization, official rhetoric fueling atrocities. The report highlights vitriolic rhetoric from high-ranking Israeli officials with command authority, which paints the entire Palestinian population as the enemy to be eliminated and forcibly displaced. Examples include President Isaac Herzog stating, "An entire nation out there is responsible, and that Israel would break their backbone." Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu referred to Palestinians as Amalek, a biblical reference commanding the slaughter of men, women, infants, and sucklings and monsters. Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant called Palestinians human animals, announced full offense on Gaza, stated he had released all the restraints, and declared that Gaza will never return to what it was. Other officials called for maximum damage, referred to the situation as the Gaza Nakba, and even called for striking Gaza with nuclear bombs, with one Likud MK writing, "Bring down buildings. Bomb without distinction. Flatten Gaza. Without mercy. This time there is no room for mercy." There is cogent evidence that this dehumanizing and genocidal rhetoric has been internalized and acted upon by troops on the ground. Soldiers have been documented referring to Palestinians as terrorists, roaches, and rats, and have boasted about killing families, mothers, and children. They have also called for settlements in Gaza and the wiping off the seed of Amalek, directly echoing the language of their leadership. This demonstrates a direct link between the rhetoric and the actions on the ground. High-ranking Israeli officials, those with command authority, have consistently used extremely dehumanizing and genocidal language, explicitly calling for the destruction or collective punishment of the entire nation of Palestinians in Gaza. This is not isolated or low-level rhetoric. The UN Special Rapporteur explicitly states that this rhetoric constitutes strong evidence of direct and public incitement to commit genocide, and critically that there is cogent evidence that this language has been internalized and acted upon by troops on the ground. This establishes a direct pathway from leadership to ground-level actions. The report also details the actual atrocities committed on the ground, such as indiscriminate killings, targeting of civilians, especially women and children, and widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, which align with the acts described in the dehumanizing rhetoric. The direct correlation between the explicit dehumanizing and genocidal rhetoric from high-ranking officials and the documented actions and attitudes of troops on the ground establishes a powerful causal link. This indicates that the language used by leadership is not merely inflammatory, it serves as a direct command and psychological conditioning that effectively lowers the moral and legal barriers for soldiers to commit acts that would otherwise be unthinkable against a civilian population. This demonstrates the mens rea specific intent element of genocide, as the rhetoric directly expresses the intent to destroy the group and actively encourages its perpetration, thereby facilitating the commission of atrocity crimes. International legal condemnation, ICJ orders and UN resolutions. The International Court of Justice (ICJ), the UN's highest court, issued a legally binding order for provisional measures on January 26, 2024, in response to South Africa's case alleging that Israel is violating the Genocide Convention. The court explicitly required Israel to prevent genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, enable the provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance, prevent and punish incitement to commit genocide, and preserve evidence. The ICJ concluded that there was a plausible risk of irreparable prejudice to the rights of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide, and this order was automatically sent to the UN Security Council. On Thursday, June 12, 2025, the UN member nations voted overwhelmingly, 149-12 with 19 abstentions, in the General Assembly to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages and unrestricted access for the delivery of desperately needed food to 2 million Palestinians. The resolution explicitly condemned any use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. While General Assembly resolutions are not legally binding, this vote serves as a powerful barometer of world opinion, reflecting a widespread global consensus on the urgency and nature of the crisis. Despite the overwhelming global legal and moral consensus reflected in the ICJ's binding orders and the UN General Assembly's strong resolution, a significant political impasse persists, primarily due to the actions of the United States. The ICJ's provisional measures are legally binding, representing the highest judicial authority Euro's determination of a plausible risk of genocide and a clear directive for Israel to cease acts that could contribute to it. The UN General Assembly vote, while not legally binding, represents the collective conscience of 149 nations, explicitly condemning starvation as a method of warfare and demanding a ceasefire and aid access. This demonstrates a clear global alignment with the findings of the UN Special Rapporteur and the concerns raised by human rights organizations. However, the United States has repeatedly used its veto power in the UN Security Council to block similar resolutions calling for a ceasefire and unrestricted aid, doing so 5 times. The US has justified these vetoes by claiming the resolutions were unbalanced or not linked to hostage release, despite overwhelming international support. This consistent diplomatic shielding of Israel, coupled with the continued provision of extensive military and financial aid, effectively undermines international legal efforts and the global consensus. The US's actions create a profound disconnect between international law and diplomatic action, suggesting that political considerations are overriding humanitarian imperatives and legal obligations. This dynamic allows the alleged genocidal acts to continue with a degree of impunity, demonstrating a failure of the international system to enforce its own principles when faced with powerful political alliances. The continued U.S. support for Israel, despite internal State Department reports documenting over 500 potential violations of international law by Israel and White House lawyers rejecting findings that Israel was deliberately blocking humanitarian aid, further highlights this political impasse. The conclusions. The evidence presented in this report paints a harrowing picture of a deliberate campaign of destruction and starvation being waged against the Palestinian people in Gaza. The catastrophic humanitarian crisis, characterized by widespread famine, the decimation of life-sustaining infrastructure, and repeated forced displacement, is not an accidental byproduct of conflict but a calculated outcome of Israeli policies. The systematic nature of these actions, coupled with the explicit dehumanizing rhetoric from high-ranking Israeli officials, provides compelling grounds to believe that the threshold for genocide has been met, as concluded by the UN Special Rapporteur. The targeting of civilians at aid distribution points, chillingly described as human slaughterhouses and bait in a sport of hunting, underscores the extreme peril faced by those desperately seeking survival. The establishment of the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF), rejected by major aid organizations and branded as humanitarian camouflage, and a tactic of this genocide, further exposes a system designed not for genuine relief but for control and complicity in the ongoing atrocities. The international community, through the binding orders of the International Court of Justice and the overwhelming vote in the UN General Assembly, has recognized the gravity of the situation and called for an immediate cessation of these acts. However, the consistent military, financial, and diplomatic support provided by the United States to Israel, including repeated vetoes of UN ceasefire resolutions, has created a profound political impasse. This support effectively shields Israel from accountability and enables the continuation of actions that are causing immense suffering and destruction, thereby implicating the United States in the alleged mass genocide. The moral and political corruption of the world, as noted by the UN Special Rapporteur, has indeed enabled the destruction of Gaza.